Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the VERSARIEN PLC Interim Results Investor Presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just please simply type in your question at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and we'll send you an email when they're ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. As usual, before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll, and I'm sure the company would be most grateful for your participation. And I'd now like to hand over to Neil Ricketts, CEO from VERSARIEN. Good afternoon, Neil.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mark, for the introduction. I'm joined today by Chris, who's going to walk us through the first half interims, the financial details, and then I'm going to be joined by Steve, who's going to specifically talk about activities in South Korea and what's been going on out there. Obviously, as Mark said, we'll be answering some of the questions as we go through the presentation, and any live questions that come in, we'll do our best to answer, but all questions will be answered post-event. So, Chris, could you lead us through the interim results, please?
Yes, of course, and good evening, everybody. As you're aware, we published the results on Monday, and I will just very briefly take you through those results. The first slide that we're going to look at just summarises those results and the headlines. I think most people will have actually seen them, but just for the sake of those who may not have done, we were pleased to report that the group revenues from continuing operations were up 41% to 3.8 million from 2.7 million the previous period. And we refer to continuing operations here because we have classified the revenues that were from the aluminium business that was based in Cheltenham, which we announced as being discontinued as a discontinued activity. And consequently, in these results, they're classified as such, which means from an accounting perspective, we have to structure the income statement slightly differently from that which we've done previously, and bring in the net results of those discontinued activities as one line. Hence the reason that we're referring to continuing operations here. It's worth noting that any relocation or redundancy costs in relation to that move are classified as exceptional, and there's a note in the interim statement which details that. Also, the ongoing lease costs at Longhope are broadly similar to that at Cheltenham, but of course they provide upgraded facilities and space for expansion. The revenues that were derived from our graphene activities were up 166% to 0.93 million, and in the comparative period last year they were 0.35 million, and we'll come on to a little bit more analysis of that later on. The adjusted EBITDA, which is the sort of primary measure that we use to report for the business, on continuing operations had reduced by 37%, so those losses were down by 37% to 0.71 million from 1.16 million in the comparative period. The reported loss for the business as a whole, including the discontinued operations, was 3.1 million compared to 4.34 million in the previous period. And the loss before tax for continuing operations was 2.96 million, again down from 4.3 million in the previous period. And at the balance sheet date, at the 30th of September, our cash was up to 3.5 million compared to 2.4 million at the previous period. So just a little bit more about the key points for the revenue. That increase in revenue of 1.1 million came from two sources. £500,000 is from the recovery in the two mature businesses, AAC and TC. And you may recall we now report in two business segments. One is mature businesses, one is technology businesses. And the graphene revenues of 0.9 million that reported come from two sources as well. They are derived from product sales. 0.3 million comes from product revenues, and 0.6 million comes from graphene product development agreement, being the DSTL agreement that we announced back in November 2020. And it's worth just noting that since we started work on that development agreement for product for DSTL, the total contract was 1.95 million, which we announced, and the total total income that we've recognised to date on that project is 0.9 million. So there's still a further £1 million to recognise on that particular project. If we look at the cash flow and the balance sheet, and we look at the burn rate for H1, the monthly burn rate is roughly 0.4 million, and that is made up of the net cash that's used in operations of 1.2 million, the intangibles that we have capitalised for G-Scale primarily 0.9 million, and any HP / lease repayments we've made of 0.4 million. That comes to a total of 2.5. So for 6 months, roughly our monthly burn rate is 0.4 million as reported for the first half. If you compare that to the cash and the headroom we've got of 6 million at that same date, we reported in the balance sheet that we had bank balances of 3.5 million. We had headroom on our invoice finance facilities that we could draw down if we wished to, 0.8 million. And we had 1.7 million that was still undrawn from the Innovate UK loan, which is the total of the 5.5 million less the 3.3 million that we had drawn at the balance sheet date. We also have proceeds from Lansted, which will be coming in over the next few months until 2022. They're obviously dependent upon the share price. The first Lansted instrument expires in April 22 and the second one in July 22. So, if we're looking at our monthly burn rate of 0.4 million, our cash stroke headroom of 6 million, further proceeds from the Lansted instrument, I think we can leave you to draw your own conclusions about the level of funding that we actually have. We've also expended 1.1 million in the first period on scale-up equipment, which is a significant amount for us. And we should also bear in mind that the Innovate UK is a loan, but that loan does not start to become repayable until 2024. So we're some time away from having to consider the repayments on that particular loan. So that's the sort of the main part of the numbers. So I'll hand you back to Neil to take you through some other things.
Thanks, Chris. So in terms of operational highlights, obviously we announced the investment from Graphene Lab Limited in South Korea, just short of £2 million. That includes also a royalty agreement and the trademark agreement. That's kind of part of our strategy moving forward, which is to have these key kind of associations with our customers and our suppliers. In terms of other things that happened, we're now in the process of commissioning the Spanish assets. So that's an entire factory that was moved over from Spain in this period, including all of the machinery, the testing equipment, which I'll touch on later on when we talk about the expansion at Longhope. And we've, as Chris said, we've spent £1.1 million on scaling up our processes again, something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. In terms of things that have happened on the customer side, we're very focused around our textile developments and also our concrete developments. And you'll have seen that we've signed agreements with Crosslet or Crossleet, should I say, and also Superdry. And I was very fortunate to go with the designers and the senior management to the opening of their new store, where we talked about the impact of graphene on their garments moving forward. In terms of other things that are going on within the business, although we're focused on the textiles and the construction, we also have a number of other agreements in place where we're developing through Steve's team things like materials for the packaging industry. And we're very pleased to be working with some of the largest packaging companies that are out there. So it shows that the business has a huge amount of traction now and is moving forwards in a very focused way. In terms of the post-period highlights, we obviously secured, under Steve's leadership, a grant with a number of key partners in terms of developing our nanomat technology out of Spain into pseudo-capacitors. These are required where we're looking at electrification of transport. I've already talked about Superdry and how we're working with Superdry on multiple projects. Lastly, we managed to sneak into the interims there a royalty agreement that's been signed with Gerdau, who are one of the largest steel manufacturers, if not the largest steel manufacturer in Brazil, who have started up a graphene production and graphene exploitation plan to look at replacing their steel business. And we're working closely with those on a number of projects, but the first one, which has come out as a royalty agreement, is around using our mask predominantly in Latin America, where unfortunately COVID is still very prevalent. I think that's a great kind of step for the business in terms of getting Gerdau on board and working very closely, both at the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre up at Manchester, where some of our graphene development happens, but also looking at our global footprint, which now includes South Korea, North America, Europe, the UK, and also now Latin America. One of the things that shareholders asked about during the pre-submitted questions was, what's happening at Long Hope. This is the very latest picture of our innovation centre, which is being constructed at the moment. That's about a 10,000 square foot facility and includes a state-of-the-art laboratory using some of the equipment that was purchased in Spain. We'll also be doing our own materials testing. People have asked, what's the main focus of that? Well, it's really about commercial things that customers are not happy being in a more open environment, but it's also about defense, and it's about also looking at the next stages of graphene. So making graphene is one thing, but then actually taking that graphene and using it in applications takes an awful lot of expertise and an effort. And so this, in my view, will be the way that we take the graphene that's produced in Long Hope and then feed it into customer applications. How do we get it into a bigger variety of materials as the business continues to expand? Within the Long Hope facility, we've actually moved our graphene production from about a 2,000 square foot footprint up to about an 18,000 square foot footprint. And that includes the 17 innovation area where our robot will be based. Unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a delay due to supplier issues and getting the machine from Europe. We're still anticipating that we'll have that in place and we'll be commissioning it over the Christmas period and the new year. We already have some work to do, and we'll be learning how to use that machine, developing this brand new technique. And if we get time towards the end of this presentation, we'll run the full video that we showed last time, just to give you an indication of the capability of that machine. At Long Hope, we've increased our ink production, as Chris said. So the ink used in not only our textiles, but our construction. We use graphene nanoplatelets also in construction, and we've increased the capacity using the Spanish assets. That's in the process of commissioning, as I said last time. So we've got the first machine set up. And we're now doing the electrical installation and the control systems setup so that we can meet the UK regulations now as well. We're increasing the ability for us to be able to test the materials that we're producing, and we're looking at a range of standard materials utilizing the graphene reinforcement. But we're also, increasing this research area. The slab itself will have a brand new product in it in terms of recycled polypropylene fibers, which have been reinforced with graphene as well. So this will be a real place to be able to demonstrate, and hopefully, COVID permitting, we'll be able to invite shareholders along to see some of these facilities. Shareholders are invited. In fact, any visitor that comes to this site will require an NDA, and obviously we're trying to keep all of that information as confidential as possible. So access is really quite limited, but we do hope to hold some events so that shareholders can get to touch and feel the facility and get an idea of how that has expanded, as I say, from 2,000 square foot to almost 28,000 square foot. Just catch my breath slightly. So moving on, I'm going to pass over now to Steve. Steve is down in Cambridge and has recently been to South Korea, and he's going to give you an update as to what's been going on in South Korea. Steve, can you take over now?
Thanks, Neil, and annyeonghaseyo to everybody. That's hello in Korean. So as Neil mentioned, just to give a overview, it's almost been 1 year now since the acquisition of assets from Hanwa Tekwin. So just to go through the history of where it all started. And so Samsung Tekwin, back in 2009, they initiated the graphene business under their semiconductor parts operation department. They worked on predominantly 3 national projects, one with the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, MOTI, and others with the MSIT, that's the Ministry of Science and ICT. And those amounted to around £24 million. And the main goals there were to achieve quite large-scale growth of single-layer graphene via the chemical vapor deposition, CVD approach. Lots of effort and activity were going towards development of graphene in different applications, particularly those that will rely on roll-to-roll, very high throughput manufacturing. So a lot of work has been done on looking at the replacement or substitution of indium tin oxide that we find in most of our displays and devices. And so also along those lines, systems were built capable of producing around 1.6 by 1.6 meter by 90 centimeter scale graphene. So that's was followed by a takeover by Hanwa Tekwin in 2015, who then launched further projects with MSIT, and those were looking to develop new equipment for testing and characterizing graphene in a non-destructive way. Many of the techniques that we have to use for characterizing graphene can be destructive, but obviously there's quite a lot of interest in, once we've made large-scale samples, how to put those into an application and analyze the quality without destroying those. So there's several pieces of inspection equipment which have now been transferred over to VERSARIEN Korea, and 2 of the previous ongoing projects were then completed during that phase as well, between 2015 and 2020. Obviously, the discussions with Hanwa Tekwin have taken many months during 2020, and I'll go through what's been happening since then. So on to the next slide. Our story didn't start there. We date back to around 2017, where Neil first went out to Japan and Korea as part of a Megatech trade mission. That was a UKTI led mission, and that was where we first met Matt Walker, part of DIT, Department of International Trade. And then in the subsequent years, in June and September 2018, Neil again visited Korea. We're also involved in a Innovate UK Global Business Innovation Programme, GBIP, focused on advanced materials. And again, that led to new collaborations and partnerships in South Korea. In October 2018, we appointed Rachel Kim as our Korean representative, who's still with the business. And in those years leading up to the first discussions, myself and Matt Walker, again, since he joined the business, we visited to again build networks, build collaborations, and that was all supported by Rachel Kim. So probably June last year was the time where we started. We heard about the opportunity to acquire the graphene business from Hanwa Tekwin. So obviously there were several months there of discussions, assessing the IP, due diligence, and negotiations, all with COVID going on in the background. And then it wasn't until December 2020 that we finally acquired the assets and the IP from Hanwa Aerospace. So that was a busy year last year, and this acquisition, as we presented before, this covers more than 100 patents across 29 different families with protection in many parts of the world, and that's covering everything from the process equipment, recipes and graphene growth recipe manufacturing methods. Obviously, before we even start the graphene growth, we need to use a metal substrate, and also those substrates, depending on their cleanliness and the quality and the size of the metallic crystals, that really affects the graphene growth. So there's lots of know-how and IP based on what we do to that metal before it even goes in the furnace, before we even switch on the machines. Once we actually make the single layer graphene, lots of things you can do after the process, because naturally, once it's exposed to the environment, it's picked up certain molecules. It can have what we call doping, so it can be P-doped or N-doped, and that might then affect the final application that you're trying to develop. So there's lots of things post-treatment wise you can add certain chemicals to the graphene surface to get electrons to either move into graphene or move out of graphene, so that you can start from a clean platform. Obviously, we're growing on a metal, and that the graphene, if you want to make a semiconductor device, that has to be transferred. So one of the key processes is looking at how we can get rid of that metal. And so there's a range of both wet chemical processes and also dry processes to get the graphene from the copper or metal onto the substrate of your choice, whether that's plastic, that's glass, or could even be a textile substrate. Lots of IP there is also on that metal removal, and that's the chemical process, and also looking at end electronic devices, and so several application IP there that we can look to harness. So moving on to the next slide, this is really the story of the last year. So month by month, once we did that acquisition last December, the first few months were looking for a new facility for all of the equipment and looking for strategic partners out in South Korea. So that took about 3 months. We were searching different provinces in South Korea, looking and making sure that we fit in with all of the local environmental policies. And yeah, 3 months later, and following strategic investment from Graphene Lab in Korea, we moved into a new facility in May. And I'll go on to the next slide where that's based. And May was the month where the big move happened, moving everything from Hanwa to the new VERSARIEN Korea premises. And then subsequent months, June, July, fitting out the labs, installing, commissioning equipment, repairing some parts, hiring new staff. So we've had new technical and business development staff join the company, and they've moved across from Hanwa TechWin. So they've got all of that know-how and expertise that was critical to continuing the business. In August and September, we were involved in a Korean news program, YTN, one of their most famous news channels, and that was with myself and Matt Walker taking part from the UK. And then probably, and quicker than I'd expected, we were producing first samples by October. So first quite good quality single layer graphene samples. And then obviously we've needed to continue optimizing and improve that process, not just the graphene growth, but the transfer processes as well. So I visited beginning of November for around 10 days, and that was a great opportunity to meet the new staff, to look at what progress has been made. Meet Graphene Lab, obviously as our strategic partner. We want to have a very good relationship, very strong collaboration, and also had the opportunity to go and visit several academic institutes, meet other commercial partners that we want to work with, and also sign some collaboration agreements. While I was there, we also installed a Class 1000 clean room. And that basically means we have a very low number of particles of dust and contamination in the room. So that will enable us to provide even higher quality graphene materials. And then end of November, we've even seen our first sales of CVD graphene materials. So that's a huge step. And now we're looking to really create high quality data sheets that we can supply to the market and provide samples to both academic and commercial partners. So here's a map of South Korea. So the orange point is our new location. So we're in the Gyeonggi province. That's just south of the center of Seoul. We're about 1 hour south of Gangnam. We're about 1.5 hours from Incheon Airport, and about 30 minutes south of where Hanwa TechWin were formerly based. So that's in a city called Songnam. So it's quite a convenient location, good for getting around Korea and, as I say, traveling to and from the city center or outer lying areas. Quite a lot of areas around. We're based in a place called Hwaseong-si, and there's lots of other kind of industrial cities around that area. So it's a very good location. And probably a 1 hour in the south, city called Daejeon. Many large companies and academic institutes are based in that city as well. So we're quite well placed at the moment. So a couple of pictures of the building. You may have seen some of these before, and some photos here. We've posted some of these on Twitter. Unfortunately, I can't have videos for you today, but you may have seen me posting some images and videos of machinery being moved from a basement level building up and onto onto these large vehicles. And also another piece of kit that required actually shutting down one of the highways in South Korea was the installation of the scrubber. So that's a piece of equipment which sits outside the building, which is taking all of the extracts from our processing, cleaning it, and then emitting cleaner air. So plenty going on. Here's a few snapshots from our YTN TV news channel with myself. As I said, due to COVID, we weren't able to travel at that time, but we were able to film. And this is Mr. Kwon, who's the CTO of Graphene Lab, and we have quite frequent get-togethers to again discuss collaborations and discuss what the future holds. Here's a few pictures of the clean rooms. So I mentioned we've recently had a Class 1000 room installed. So the square room in the background. We probably won't show you inside that, but that's where the graphene is being synthesized, and that's where we do some of the other processes called lamination, transfer, and stacking. The rest of the room is hosting quite a lot of chemical testing and graphene characterization, so measuring electronic properties, measuring things like the environmental tolerance of the graphene that's produced. There's a room in the back, which I'll show a picture of in a second, which is another characterization suite. And off the page to the right-hand side, we actually have a wet chemical etching system. So as I mentioned, there's two routes to remove copper from the process, and that can be through a chemical dissolution. And so there's different systems here for doing on a batch. On the left-hand side is a batch scale, and on the right-hand side is doing more roll-to-roll processing. So you can do much larger scale, higher throughput. Here's a final snapshot of the characterization lab. So not everything here, but just you can see a Raman spectrometer on the left. We have a scanning electron microscope in the center, and that has other X-ray characterization capabilities for elemental analysis and things like that. So yeah, very well tooled up now with tools which also can help support activities in the UK, because there's equipment there that we don't have in the UK. Here are some of the first samples that we've actually sold. So a customer wanting 4-inch squares of graphene on different substrates. So actually we've supplied it with what we call a thermal release film. So this means you can transfer the graphene from that copper using a thermal release tape, and so it's a dry process. Doesn't involve any chemistry. But what we also do, we're growing the graphene as a single layer of atoms, but then we can actually stack this up, and we do that stacking these layers one by one, because for certain applications you might need a lower sheet resistance, so you want something that has a bit more conductivity, and obviously steel is optically transparent. So we have a lot of expertise in not just the growth, but also this stacking and transfer process, which is crucial to many of the applications being developed. So there's me in the lab with one of our technical guys, and again, on the right hand side, signing a collaboration agreement with one of our partners, SD Lab, and so that again is possibly more focused for the UK business, but would involve technology from VERSARIEN Korea. So SD Lab are developing novel antimicrobial devices and coatings that will sit nicely alongside our existing technology developed with Nanomat. So that should be a good collaboration, and there's further potential there to work on different kinds of sensor to detect antimicrobial species, which will go alongside some of their intended products. So that's really exciting, and I think one of the questions on the channel was, is Korea just going to be focusing on CVD graphene? And the answer is no, definitely not, because obviously we want to further establish and push what we're doing in the UK out into Asia. So although predominantly the focus will be on manufacturing CVD graphene for sale, we need to develop further academic and commercial opportunities, and also we can now support those CVD activities in the UK, Europe, and US, and where other parts where VERSARIEN already has a footprint. Of course, key to this is forming that strong relationship with Graphene Lab, who are a strategic investor, and with them we're looking to develop commercial sensors and other optoelectronic devices, and also work alongside potentially some national projects that are key to South Korea. But yeah, absolutely looking to further extend the nanoplatelets and other products that we're producing in the UK, nanine, GMP, HP materials, the GP500, which is material produced from the Spanish assets that Neil's talked about. Hexatine is still being produced, and we're looking to develop new applications with the hexagonal boron nitride. The graphinks, again, a lot of scale up going on in Long Hope at the moment, and I call them GNAX, but nanomats materials, which are quite a wide portfolio at the moment. And then, of course, the products, cementine, polygreen, graphene, we're hoping to push these out into South Korea as soon as we can. So I think that's it for me. Neil, I'll pass back to yourself to finish up.
Yeah, just going back to that last slide, actually, Steve, we've already started those conversations with our standard range of products and processes. So, that's something that we're continuing to brief our people on. The last slide of the presentation is really about our environmental statement, which is, we believe that VERSARIEN's in a unique position to deliver, substantial environmental gains by using the key technologies that we've developed. If we look at concrete, we know that we could reduce the environmental impact by up to 30%, which is obviously very topical at the moment. That's not the only thing that VERSARIEN could affect. Things like lightweighting in the automotive and aerospace applications, and Steve's team still continuing to work on the European graphene flagship project, where we're looking at key components for the aerospace industry to change the way they do things. A really disruptive technology. But we're also looking at advanced building materials. We're looking at recycling, bioplastics. And so pretty much everything that we're involved in, including energy, has been that someone talked about in the questions and answers that have been going on at the moment. They all have a massive impact in the way that the environment is currently being looked at. So very topical. That concludes the kind of presentation, but we've got some questions here, and it'd be interesting to go through some of the questions.
That's great, Neil. Let me just give you a small pause so you can break between the Q&A. So thank you to you all for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the guys take a few moments to review the investor questions submitted during today's meeting, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback will be important to the company, and immediately after this presentation's ended, you'll be redirected in order that you can provide the company with your thoughts, views and expectations. Neil, not a lot of time to look at those questions, but I guess you've had a bit of time throughout the presentation. If I may, can I just hand back to you to read out the questions where you think it's appropriate to give responses to? And obviously, as you previously mentioned, that the Q&A that was pre-submitted, obviously that you'll have a chance to review that and put some responses to that as well. So if I may just hand back to you just to read out the questions, that'd be great.
Thank you very much, Mark. We've tried to answer as many of the pre-submitted ones as we can as we go through the presentation, but what we'll do is we'll do our best to answer all of those. There were a few questions about gross margin and about forward-looking statements and stuff like that, and that's not really our job in this presentation. What those kind of things will be covered by certain research notes. So we can look forward to getting some coverage there, and that should answer some of those questions. Steve, Mike had a specific question about the South Korean facility and whether that's currently set up to do samples, or does it need to be scaled up? My kind of response would be we're always in the process of scaling up. There's always a need to get bigger to look at more available markets. But what's your view, Steve?
Yeah, it's very application dependent. So if you are wanting to go into the display market, you obviously need to make graphene as big as possible and as high throughput as possible. However, there's tons of applications. If you want to make a sensor, you can make thousands of sensors with just like 1 centimeter square of material. So yeah, it really depends on application, but we have everything in place to be able to make graphene useful in a range of applications. We will obviously need to work with other partners. We need to find other, because we will not be able to do everything. We will not be able to make a final product. And also, for example, working on things like biosensing, we need to work with some other partners that actually have some of that expertise that they can bring to us. And so, yeah, we've got everything we need to develop prototypes and other, for a number of different applications. I don't know if you want anything else there, Neil.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Steve. Hopefully that's answered your question, Mike. Ken asked about initiatives in the field of batteries. Well, obviously that's covered by our European subsidiary, Nanomat, where we have a majority stake. They're looking at using the graphenes that we produce, and that's how we came to know about the Spanish assets. And then functionalizing those and modifying those graphene materials suitable for supercapacitors and battery materials. And they've been involved in quite a few projects now. They're still, as I said at the time of acquisition, at a very early stage, but obviously that's a big market to be involved in, and one that we look forward to seeing quite a lot of progress in. So yes, we are involved in the field of energy, I would say, and that's going to become more relevant as we see the environmental factors change. In terms of specifics around where the CVD was sold, well, we're not going to tell you that, unfortunately, because that will let our competitors know exactly where to go hunting. But Jane asked, was that supplied into South Korea? And I believe it was supplied into South Korea. What we see is that we're using the global footprint, so that the materials that we're producing in the UK, we can sell those in South Korea, and vice versa. The materials that are produced in South Korea, we can then start to sell those in the UK. As Steve said, there's some constraints around that in terms of this isn't a massive factory, but it is enough to be able to satisfy our demand at the moment. We're not looking at substantial amounts of capital equipment in this new year either. I wouldn't discount the need if it was driven by a commercial decision, but as it stands at the moment, we've scaled up our main primary processes, and now it's time to look for the commercial draw that's needed there. So let's get all that equipment commissioned and set up, and then produce the sales from that equipment before we look too far. There was a pre-submitted question actually, which is quite interesting, which is, do you see, what's your business model around the production of graphene? And I kind of think that at the moment we would look towards following both. So we wouldn't discount centralized giga-type factories, but we also wouldn't discount a distributed model where it makes sense. So, for instance, if you've got a concrete manufacturer, then it makes sense to have a graphene manufacturing plant very close to that to cut the logistics and the environmental impact of producing graphene to the very minimum it can be. Martine's just asked a question now about the green mark, and I think yes, we have talked about that. We've not started it yet, but it would be part of our environmental push to look at the green mark and other environmental changes and accreditations. Paul Denny, who is working on a lot of our G-Scale projects, is our head of sustainability, and that's part of his role to look at our sustainability policies and to make sure that we're minimizing the impact not only of our factories, but also working with our customers to minimize the CO2 impact of their processes as well. There was a question about why Samsung and Hanwa relinquished the patents and equipment. Well, you'll have seen that roughly £24 million or $24 million, I think it was, Steve, was actually put into the business through national projects and in investment. The business of Tekwin was sold to Hanwa, and that included the graphene assets as part of a corporate deal in South Korea. And then subsequently, Hanwa are not in the business of developing graphene. So we had the opportunity to buy those assets and to take on that development for them. So that's kind of my understanding, but you're never quite sure in these corporate transactions, what the main driver is. There's lots of questions coming in now, so there's some technical financial questions which we'll refer to after the meeting. There's some questions about Superdry. I hope I answered some of those. We're not going to get graphene into every product, unfortunately, because there are price points and kind of benefit analysis that needs to be done. But we are working with Superdry on a large number of projects. Well, I consider it to be a large number of projects. It's definitely challenging for the team as it stands at the moment, and they cover a wide variety of different products. So obviously we can't say too much because that's a commercial engagement, and see that as being key to our development in the textile industry. But Superdry are not the only people that we're working with. We are working with a number of other people that we've talked about already. We're not going to talk about our competitors. What our competitors do is up to them. We're focused on what VERSARIEN's doing. We have a very strong strategy. Really looking forward to Diane joining us as the new chairperson in January. She comes from a background of taking a business very similar to ours in terms of its size through to a main exchange listing and being involved in that whole scale up. So I've worked with Diane and known Diane for a while. I like the way that she works. She's very challenging as a chairperson. She's very good at corporate governance, and for me, it's about not only exploiting her relationships and her experience, but for the good of the company, but also learning from some of the mistakes and looking and reflecting on how we can do things within the company much better. And Diane is very good at that. She comes from an operational background where the business had to scale very quickly, and I think that experience, it will be absolutely key to us. There's lots of questions about forward-looking statements and things like that. We can't answer those, unfortunately, but we will, as I said before, take those up with various bits of research that we're doing. So I'm trying to look at the questions as I'm talking as well.
I think also worth pointing out that a lot of these technical questions, maybe there's answers in our previous presentation given last month on this platform.
Yeah, exactly, Steve. And this is a quarterly update. It's very close to the previous one because the previous one was research scheduled, and we hope to have another one of these in the next kind of 3 months, so that we can keep our shareholders up to date with what's happening. And that's also an opportunity for you to ask as many questions as you can. Just looking through if there's anything here. Do we have any? Brian looks like he's been busy in the US, which is true. We've got a number of good opportunities in the US. Have you got plans for a manufacturing base? Well, that will come on the back of commercial success if it's relevant. So that's one that we're keeping a watchful eye on. At the moment, we're quite able to supply that from the UK. Did VERSARIEN supply the graphene that went into, there's actually 7 kilometers of the A1M? Yes, we did. That was in the public domain. Any news on the university trials in terms of textiles? Yes, myself and Bobby sat through a presentation a few weeks ago about the test results. Very, very good news as far as I'm concerned. That is forming the basis of not only the GrapheneWare website, but also, which Bobby's working on at the moment, but also a white paper, which I'm hoping Steve will be working on as well. So, how far are we away from needing to make any decisions? We're at the moment demonstrating our technology to a range of customers, so that's not a decision that we need to make in the immediate future. God, there's lots of questions here now. I wish I'd asked them a little bit earlier. Do we have sufficient production capacity? I think I mentioned that earlier. As it stands at the moment, yes, we've got plenty of capacity for what we have currently planned, although we don't, we're constantly monitoring that. Large companies, they take a long time, unfortunately, to move, and sometimes it's much better to look at smaller ones. We've got a question here. This is one for you, Chris. How much of the loan is due in 2024? I think you know, it's a scheduled payment that goes on for it's what we would classify as a relatively soft loan. But
yeah, I think we said back when we issued the RNS, we gave the details of that, which was it's repayable quarterly over 3 years. And that's, you know, that's the capital. We're already paying interest on it as well. So yeah, all in that RNS.
There's a question here from Andy. Did you enjoy Puzzle X and the panel you were on? Yes, I did enjoy Puzzle X. It gave me a great opportunity to sit down with Jose Antonio, who came as part of the Spanish assets, and Roberto to talk about our plans for VERSARIEN Europe. We kind of hedging our bets over Brexit when we set up VERSARIEN Europe, but I'm pleased to say that Jose Antonio is now part of our team, and I wanted him when we were first talking to the guys in Spain. So that's a great result for the company. He's also part of our business development team. So someone asked, you know, do we have an international footprint? Well, we have guys in South Korea, we have people in Europe, and we have people in the UK. Obviously, Brian out in the US as well. Do we have any thoughts about future takeovers? Well, that's always an interesting thing. We always keep an eye out on what's happening. We're monitoring the competitive environment in which we work. We've seen a lot of people fall by the wayside. We've seen some new entrants, and we keep our eye and we support as many people as possible. The reason that we support them is that it's very important for the industry to have options. You know, if you have a monopoly, it's very, very difficult for large companies to actually you know, build a competitive supply chain. So, you know, I actually look forward to having good competitors in the market because it drives development and it keeps everybody honest. And now we have you know, a situation where we're seeing consolidation in the market. So yeah, we do keep an eye out on all of our competitors, and I'm sure that there'll be opportunities in the future. We also look for acquisitions, as we've always stated, you know, where they can advance the adoption of our technology. So looking for people both behind us in terms of our supply chain, but also in front of us. So that's an active an activity that keeps both myself and Chris busy. Unfortunately, you have to kiss there's an old adage that you have to kiss a lot of frogs until you find a prince. Well, acquisitions, there's no truer statement, unfortunately. I'm kind of running out of steam here. There's a question mark about how advanced the commissioning of the new 100-ton equipment is. That's advancing well. The mechanical side of the first machine is now complete, and as I said earlier, we're looking at the control systems because it came from Europe. We need to make sure they're compliant with the UK, and we're in the process of making some minor changes to the control system there to accommodate that. In terms of communication, we're trying to communicate as much as we can. Unfortunately, myself, Chris, and Steve are actively involved in the business as well, so that limits the amount of communication sometimes we can do. We work quite long hours, but we try to keep the business or the shareholders as informed as possible through every channel we can. So that includes podcasts, that includes social media, where we have a very tight policy, and also events like this. So we do like doing events with shareholders. They can get to see the business and hold the directors accountable. So as far as I'm concerned, that's an important thing for us to do. Good. I think that's just about us, Mark. I'm looking
No.
at any of the questions that we may be able to answer. Some of these we may have to answer after the meeting, unfortunately, but we'll do our best to answer every question we can.
That's absolutely no problem at all, Neil, and thank you very much indeed to all those investors that have taken the time to submit questions today. Neil, I'll shortly redirect investors to provide you with their thoughts and expectations and give you their feedback. But I guess before doing so, if you've got a few last words, that would be great, and then I'll redirect everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is thank you for all your support, thank you for all your questions, and I guess it falls on the management team to wish you all the very best of season's greetings. It's been a very trying time for anybody that's been involved in business over the last 2 years, but we've seen a huge amount of progress in the business. Not least the production capacity, but also from Steve's team on the technical side. I'd like to thank all of our employees who have gone the extra mile in some very, very difficult conditions. And I'd also like to thank the directors for all of their efforts as well. And so that's all from me, Mark.
That's great. Neil, Chris, Steve, thank you once again for updating investors this evening. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as I'll now automatically redirect you for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can really better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be warmly welcomed by the company. On behalf of the management team of VERSARIEN PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, and good evening to you all.